Hello everybody, today's topic is an interesting one, and it's a really interesting one because I literally just read this whole script that I wrote, and my mic wasn't on, so I'm gonna have to read it again. So I hope you're having a great day, sit back and relax, and we're gonna talk about some multiplayer. So as you're all aware, Mario Maker 2 is multiplayer, and every level is available to play in multiplayer. While multiplayer is a great addition, it's gonna be really fun that when I play with my brother and friends, it's got me and a lot of people concerned that their levels will be broken or cheesed because of the multiplayer functionality. Cheese is someone exploiting the level in an unintended way, and I'm going to explore some examples of that and what it can and can't do, theoretically of course. But first I want to say that this issue could have been avoided if Nintendo made a creation in a way that I think would be ideal, and maybe you guys do too. They're clearly trying to drive multiplayer home, and it's their main marketing aspect of the game, and I think that's a pretty accurate statement to say because the core 4 styles don't have a lot of new enemies or power-ups such as the mini mushroom or ice flower, so therefore multiplayer is their only real marketing thing outside of 3D World to differentiate it from the first game. So this is why I believe multiplayer is enabled for each and every level because they want it that way. I think it would have been better if when you make a level, there's a box like this that lets you check whether you want it or not in your level. Multiplayer enabled or disabled. That would literally solve everything. In a few other videos, I've talked a lot about how I think unique characters such as High Jump Luigi, Floaty Peach, Starspin Rosalina, or Daisy Wario, whoever, would be amazing additions, and people always write novels in the comments that, oh, it wouldn't work because multiplayer. And while that's true, it's just so damn easy to solve if they literally had this option for creators. This would also allow for amiibo costumes to work because they don't work because of multiplayer, but if we had an enabled or disabled button, it would work, and it's not rocket science. However, we don't have this option. So now there's all these questions about how multiplayer works and how it will be able to break or exploit levels that creators design for a single player. For example, in multiplayer, you can bounce on someone's head. If you make a multiplayer level with this in mind, how can a single player beat the level? Do you clear and upload levels by yourselves, or do you clear multiplayer intended levels with multiple players? We don't know how any of that works because so far it's really unclear, and we have to wait probably until the game before we can figure out all this stuff. But today's video is going to talk about multiplayer, some theories about problems, and some theories about solutions. So let's get into it for the second time. So there's a lot of speculation about what multiplayer does, and there's some interesting controversies with it, as in some scenes from journalist footage and from the direct you can see things like the bubbles, Yoshi's respawn, clown cars respawn, and if that's an inherent feature of multiplayer and not an intention of the creator, multiplayer could fundamentally just make the experience easier even if it's not the creator's intention. Because their intention could be to make a really hard level, and these things would break that. I've also seen a few people talk about doors and subworlds and how those might work with multiplayer. It's all theoretical, of course, but like, would different players be able to load them at different times and bring items such as POW blocks and springs and continually do so to make like a POW block tower or use a spring to cheese a section if they have more than one spring? Like, there's a lot of questions about the nature of potential cheese and exploits that we just don't know, but they're concerning if they are real. So I can't give any concrete reasons to prevent it, but there's something that I definitely know is going to happen, and that involves the bubbles. Originating in the New Super Mario Bros. Series with multiplayer, when someone dies, they respawn in a bubble and drift back to the other player. This is in Mario Maker 2 for cooperative multiplayer, and I think it's a big problem for cheese, especially when it comes to Kaizo, or just difficult levels that people want to make. For a normal level, it's not a problem because you're just walking around hitting blocks, having fun and whatnot. It's a fucking normal level. But for all the people who make hard levels with tight platforming, tricksy sections, and really cool stuff going on, multiplayer is going to really fuck up the intention of those creators. Because the intention of those levels is to test skill and have the player do hard and cool moves, if they fail those moves, they're supposed to die. Here's an example setup of a quote-unquote hard section that I quickly threw together in Lunar Magic for an example. If it's in single player, and you make it through the first section and then you die, you start the whole level over again, right? Well, in multiplayer with the bubbles, if this theory is true, which I think it probably is because bubbles are in the game, and you can just have a player too, one person could stand here, indicated by the blue coins, and another player could continuously attempt a section over and over and over again. Because if they die, they respawn without penalty. And this isn't a good example of a level at all. I'm just demonstrating that quote-unquote hard shit can be exploited. Especially if used over the whole level, it can be very exploitive and cheesy and against the creator's intention. The bubble respawn is pretty much kind of nasty. I know I plan on making hard levels, and way better ones than this chat example. But I don't know how I feel about people playing my levels of multiplayer. If you can stand still, player 2 can stand still and let player 1 infinitely try a section over and over again, and they act as a checkpoint. They act as an infinite checkpoint and a temporary checkpoint anywhere you want. And this is type of cheese. And you can do this cheese even if it's not explicitly multiplayer, even if you don't have your little brother or your best friend over at your house or whatever, because you know you can't play with them online, but someone could literally just bring out a second Joy-Con, like the player, like if I'm playing a game, I could cheese it. I could bring out a second Joy-Con, not even play with it, and just have the player 2 exist, and then I can just attempt a section over and over and over again, and if you die, you just respawn on the other person. And here's footage of that going on in the New Soups U game, whatever, the shite one. And this is really, like, I felt disgusting to it, and it's also really slow and boring. So I don't think a lot of people are going to do it. But if someone's really bad and they're like, I want to cheese this level, they'll do it because they can do it. And then also, people make really hard, like, low clear rate levels, and like, like, people can get the clout by clearing low clear rate levels, but they can do it cheesed, and then they'll act like they did it for real. That's what I was trying to think. I had to pause right there, so that's gonna be completely edited out. But yeah, it's definitely an exploit, and I find that the bubble respawn literally anywhere in a level and infinitely is pretty concerning, and it's part of why I believe multiplayer should be enabled or disabled for levels, and up to the creator's preference, not that of Nintendo's marketing. So, these are the problems, but how can we prevent them? How can we solve them? How can we prevent cheese of infinite respawning with the bubble, and God knows what multiplayers can do with doors, items, and respawning Yoshis, and other exploits that we can't even imagine until we see everything that's in the game? There aren't a lot of concrete answers, as obviously we can't test this stuff yet, but I got a few theories and ideas on how we could minimize this stuff. The first is a tight timer. This is a good strategy in general if you're concerned about cheese in your level, if you're not good at getting rid of unintended strategies when you're making it. Because in general, if there's less time in the level, your player has less time to walk around and find exploits. Like, it's X equals Y. And because this also means that they have less time to walk around, go through doors and pipes, and carry items around, especially in multiplayer, and when this whole video is about multiplayer, a tighter timer would really limit the multiplayer cheese if there is some crazy stuff that you could do if it just takes time, because less time, they can't do it. And also a tight timer would solve the respawn cheese I was just talking about with the bubbles, and the main concern of this video. If someone's trying to use a player 2, like their best friend, or if they're just pulling out a Joy-Con and just trying to infinitely respawn off of the quote-unquote Luigi or whatever, to attempt a section over and over again as a temporary checkpoint, and an infinite checkpoint at that, the timer would dictate that they just do it the first time and not do the cheese, because by the time they do succeed over the section, it'll have been too late. You don't need your level to have a pixel perfect finish. Like, you don't need like a second left on the clock or 5 seconds left on the clock. You don't need that. Just having 200 seconds in your level instead of 400 would give people a lot less time to fish around in your level and just do the intended straight path to the finish. The second thing I could suggest, and I think is a solid concept to limit multiplayer cheese, if you're concerned about it, is to use more one-try sections during level. And what I mean by that is like sections where if you don't do it the first time, you die because the level's over for you. Of course, if you don't care about multiplayer, like people playing your level and cheesing your level, then this video, and more specifically this suggestion, doesn't really affect you. However, if you are worried about it, I think more use of falling platforms, which I would characterize as a one-try section, because you know when you touch it, it falls down and then you can't do it over again. So more use of falling platforms, or more sections where you have like one try to jump off an enemy to make a gap, are inherently worse for multiplayer, because they're harder to do in single player, and they're harder and crazier to do if you have multiple people running around. So assuming the platform or enemy doesn't come back for the other player, only really one person can advance. And then also, when talking about the respawn cheese, you'll notice in my example, there's only blue coins where like someone could actually stand for the respawning, right? But if the other person, like the person you're going to respawn on, has to move and not sit still, like if there's falling platforms or fast stuff going on, it'll be either harder or impossible to respawn because they won't be able to stand there. They'll actually have to play the level. So falling platforms and like stuff like that will probably discourage multiple players from playing your level in general, but it'll also probably minimize the cheese that they can do if they do decide to play it. Alright guys, I'm literally out of breath. This is like the second time I've read this probably like 12-minute script. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. This is the conclusion now. But pretty much those were the only two things I could think of right now as to minimize cheese, as the game isn't out yet, and obviously we can't test these things for ourselves, like test the theories for cheese and test the possible solutions. But these theoretical ideas might help you out if you're worried about what multiplayer might do. I know some people will be like, who the fuck cares? But I stand adamant that there should be a multiplayer enabled or disabled feature and that isn't forced onto creation. Especially because for everyone who's played Mario Maker 1 or is working on a ROM hack like how I am, you've only been making levels for one person. And a lot of the creators in the community had developed a formula or a style that they probably don't want to adapt for 2 or even 4 people. Most levels will probably discourage multiplayer for that reason, and I can just assume that my own won't encourage it unless I make a multiplayer specific level. But the problem, the whole debate just comes down to the fact that we don't have a choice of whether we want to make it or not. Which I think is a negative thing in a game that's all about personal creation and choice. And if you've got a problem with that, that's your problem. Because we as consumers have the right to be critical and express what is good and bad about the product. So I've been Morton's Castle, and hopefully this video has contributed to the discussion of Mario Maker 2 multiplayer and the good, bad, and ugly surrounding it. I'm totally out of breath. I'll remember to turn on my mic next time. But thank you guys so much for 1K. I'll be talking about more about it in the future. And my actual 1 year of YouTube is coming up in almost a month. So we'll talk a lot about the channel soon. So until next time, bye bye.